much for being here. I'm going to wait about another minute or two for people to join in, and meanwhile, maybe you can tell me if you have ever tried jelly printing on tissue paper before, because that's what I'm going to show today, how to print on tissue paper, and I'm also going to show you the benefits of tissue paper in your art journal compared to other collage material. Well, printing on tissue paper is really fun, and you can basically do any technique that you can do on normal paper, or what's normal paper, right? On like copier paper or watercolor paper or whatever paper you're using. You can do all of the techniques also on tissue paper. The only thing that you have to keep in mind is that tissue paper is a bit more fragile, and so you have to be careful with the amount of paint and ink and things you use on the tissue paper. I would, for instance, not work with wet ink directly on tissue paper, because then when you lift up the tissue paper you will probably rip it, and so I would rather let the ink dry on the plate and then use a thin layer of paint to pick up the colors from the plate, so you can work with a thin layer. But I'm going to show all of that to you, and I think that quite a lot of people have joined in. Inge, do you mean acrylic inks? Yes, acrylic ink, they are really wet, and if you put them on the plate they hardly dry. It takes a long time for them to dry, and if you put tissue paper on acrylic ink, then the tissue paper just gets too wet and too fragile, and then you can't pull the print. It's you can experiment with all the different products with tissue paper, but today I'm going to focus mainly on using acrylic paint, because it's not that I only want to show you how to print on tissue paper, but I also want to show you how you can use that paper in your art journal. And for that I want paper that dries really quick, is dry really quick, so I can actually use it. So we're going to focus on acrylic paint on tissue paper, but there is no reason why you should not try different products and experiment with them. So let me see. Yeah, I think I will just flip the camera around so you can see my gel plate, and then I will just start printing. So here we go. Okay, I think this should work. I think this is nice in the middle. Right, so first let me show you some paper that I've already printed on. Let me see, I think the camera just needs a little bit. So I think that's better. So here I have a pile of tissue paper that I already printed on. And as you can see, they just look like any gel print that you could make on different kinds of paper, but then it's on tissue paper. And if I keep it a little bit closer to the camera, you can see that you can see my fingers shine through the paper. And when you use this paper in your art journal and you use a matte medium to glue it down, then the tissue paper will go almost completely translucent, which means that you will still see all the color and details from the background, and you're just adding new color or new texture on top. But how to do that, I will show you later after we created some pages. So I showed you to do some pages. So besides the white tissue paper, you can also print on colored tissue paper. And I have a couple of samples here where I printed on colored tissue paper. Personally, I'm not really a fan of printing on colored tissue paper, although it can be really nice, especially when you do more like a monochromatic colors. But when you print on colored tissue paper, you kind of lose the benefit of printing on tissue paper in that matter that it will not turn translucent when you glue it down. On the other hand, it's still very thin paper, which is really nice if you want to do collage and build up layers, and you don't want your pages to become too bulky. So then you can also use colored tissue paper. Now, tissue paper, you can get different kinds of tissue paper, and most of my tissue paper comes from when I buy clothes. Sometimes when you buy a t-shirt and it's folded, then there's this like tissue paper sheet in between. Or in shoe boxes, I have here some tissue paper which is a bit glossy but very translucent, which comes from shoe boxes. And of course you also have the tissue paper that's being used to wrap gifts, or sometimes when you order something, it's also really nice wrapped, and you have this like tissue paper in there, and you get all these different colors. But you can also buy tissue paper like in a craft store, and it's not always called tissue paper. Often it's also called silk paper. And so you should look for the thinnest possible. I prefer the one that is the thinnest that I can get, and because that kind of totally sinks into your background when you apply it with the matte medium, and you can see how translucent it is already, how much my hand is showing through. And I saw from the corner of my eye somebody asking if I iron my tissue paper, and I don't, because when I print on it, it already kind of smooth out, but especially when I glue it into my art journal with the matte medium, it's like totally smoothing out, and you really don't need to iron it. But if you want to, you could. I would just put like a tea towel on top of the tissue paper before adding a hot iron on top of it. And then there's also somebody saying you could use pattern drawing paper. You could, if you only are looking for the benefit of getting thin paper to use for your collage material, but the pattern drawing paper is not as translucent as the tissue paper when you glue it down. And it's also not like usually not completely white, so you get this like a little bit grayish finish on your pages, but it would work. So let me start with doing a couple of prints, and I'm going to print on the white paper because I want to show you the benefits of the translucency. And I'm going to start with a stencil, I think. The funny thing is, normally when I do prints, I don't really like to have a white space in my prints. I like white space, but white space from paint and not white space from the white paper. So usually I want my prints to be completely covered with paint. And in the tissue paper prints, I am actually looking for that white space, because only where there's no paint you will see the background when you glue it in your art journal. So I'm just going to roll out some paint and mix it. And if you have looked at any of my demos before, you always hear me say how important thin layers of paint are. And they are, but with tissue paper even more, because if you have a lot of paint, the paint will kind of soak through your tissue paper to the top, and you can't like flatten it out, because you will get the paint all over your hands. Of course you could use a sheet of copier paper on top to avoid that, but then still your paper would become very fragile and then probably tear when you lift up the paper. So I use a really thin layer of paint, and because it is so translucent, I can see very clearly where my paper has touched the paint and where I need to rub a little bit more. You don't want your paper to dry on the plate, because that will also make it hard to remove it. So this is the first print, is not my favorite one, although, as I said, on white paper this would not be one of my favorites, but on tissue paper I can totally see myself tearing out a little piece and glue that in my art journal. But I'm aiming for the paint that's left underneath the stencil. And picking that up, I have to say we had a really nice summer day today here in the Netherlands. It was really warm, and we don't have air conditioning here, so it is really warm in this room, and the paint might dry a little bit faster than I want, but this looks really cool. This comes off perfectly. Now look at this. This is what I really like. This kind of prints I really like on tissue paper, because all these white areas here will shine, the background on your art journal page will shine through these areas in your print. And this is definitely one that I will show you later, how that looks when you glue that on top of an already colored background. So that's my second print. And then another way of printing where you can really create open areas is using stamps, like for instance foam stamps. This set of foam stamps was created by my friends Natalie Kalbach and Marcia Falk for our workshop Beyond the Paper. And foam stamps are really fun to use on the gel plate, because usually they have a bit bolder design than a rubber stamp, and they are really easy to clean and to use with acrylic paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some paint again. Let's make the color combination a little bit different. And instead of covering my entire gel plate, I'm going to cover only half of the gel plate with paint. And then I'm going to use my foam stamps to, on this side, pick up paint, which creates an open area, and on this side, putting the paint back down on my gel plate. Now this pink color, I used a little bit too little paint, so I can't really transfer it, also because it's drying so fast that I can hardly pick it up, but you get the idea. And now I have to be a little bit fast because otherwise the paint is dry before I put my tissue paper on top. But let's see what comes off. This looks quite okay. And here you go. So you can see here that the foam stamp removed the paint. So here you will see the background colors, and here you just get the pattern. What is also really nice to do on tissue paper is printing with white paint, just plain white paint, because when you use tissue paper on top of a colored background in your art journal, the white will be really opaque, more than when you print straight into your art journal. So you can do some really nice accents using white prints in your art journal. So let's do a white print. Not sure with what yet, but let me think. Let me see just for a moment if there are any questions. There are some comments. Let me see. Someone is asking where, I don't know if the question was for me, but where I buy my tissue paper. And so I buy it from a Dutch store called CC Hobby. But if you're outside of the Netherlands, then that's not valid information for you. Okay, I don't think there's anything else that I need to address right now. Let me see. I'm going to use these Jelly Arts printing tools to create some texture in my white paint. So I'm going to create those open areas by taking away some of the paint with this comb, like this. So I'm just kind of removing some of the paint, and now I'm going to print that on my tissue paper. And as you can see, a little bit comes through the tissue paper. If you really don't like that and you really want to keep your hands clean, then you can just place a sheet of copier paper on top of the tissue paper before you start rubbing, and then it will be on your copier paper and not on your hands. So I don't know if you can see it, but there is actually a white texture on my tissue paper. But when I will use it later in my art journal, you will see it pop up. And let's also use some of my texture blocks. So these texture blocks, there is a video on the Jelly Art YouTube channel showing how I create these texture blocks. It's quite an old video, but there's also Michael's Zoom class, which is also available through the Jelly Art YouTube channel, where I also show how you can create these texture blocks. So these are really fun because you can create all kinds of textures. and you have like 6 textures in one tool, and you can just mix and match them with all kinds of supplies everybody has in their home. So that's really fun. And here I'm also going to try and move one color into the other color. So I'm going to use my texture tool to stamp in the blue paint, and I'm lifting it up, which creates an open area here, but then I put it back down in the yellow area, and that way I'm transferring the blue paint into the yellow paint. And of course you can do that the other way around too. You can also pick up the yellow paint and kind of transfer it into the blue area, but that will show less well than the blue on top of yellow. So this is quite wet, and I'm actually going to take that sheet of copier paper now to smooth out my tissue paper. And here we go. Isn't that nice? And if you sit down like an hour or something, you can create a whole bunch of this collage material, and then you can like play in your art journal for hours, mixing and matching these tissue papers. And what is really nice too is that you can also pile them up. You can build up layers of tissue paper, and each next tissue paper will show the previous tissue paper shining through, and so you can create really very textured, colorful backgrounds in your art journal. Maybe you noticed that I didn't clean my plate at all in between prints, and I do that on purpose, because then you get these like really nice leftover pickups, like, which gives it your prints a little bit of a distressed look, not so clean. I really like that. You can even still see some of the white lines here, and probably in my next prints you will see these numbers popping up a little bit too. So with the tissue paper you have to be a little bit careful that you don't pile them up while they're still wet, because then they will all stick together, and we don't want that. So let's do another print using how about using a texture plate. A texture plate is basically the same as a rubber stamp. So you could also do this with rubber stamps, but you have to be really careful when you use rubber stamps that you clean them like immediately after using them with acrylic paint, because acrylic paint is really ruining your rubber stamps if it stays on it. These are meant to be used for, with acrylic paint on the gel plate, so it's okay that the paint stays on. But if you want to use your rubber stamps and you want to stamp with them later, you really have to clean them. So you could put like a bucket with water on your desk, and when you've used your rubber stamp, toss it in the bucket and leave it there until you're done printing, and then you can clean it. But don't let it dry on top of your rubber stamp. That's really a shame. So I'm going to use some more colors here. And then I'm also going to show you some tissue paper where I actually use a second layer of paint to pick up the color from the plate, because that also gives a really nice result. You cannot use it the way you use tissue paper with open areas, because the color on your tissue paper will be solid. There will be no open areas, so there will be no popping through of the colors underneath. But it is really nice collage material, and it's really thin, so it's really nice if you want to work with several layers of paint or of paper on top of each other. So I'm just going to push this in here, and then transfer paint from one area to the other area, creating a fun pattern in multiple colors. So maybe this is not the right one to show you with the second layer, because it's really wet, and that means we would have to wait forever. So I will do another one with a thinner layer of paint after this one. But first I'm going to pick up this one. And again, I'm using my copier paper because it's quite wet. So it will probably soak through. Not that bad. There might stay quite some paint behind. Yes, it is. But this is pretty, isn't it? Well, at least I think it is. But I love color. So this would actually, there's so much paint left here that I might actually use this one to pick up with a second layer. It's still a little bit wet. I can add a little bit more texture here. How about using the foam stamps again? And I'm just going to roll out some paint on my cleanup paper here. You don't see it, but I have my cleanup paper here at the side. And I'm just going to roll out a little bit of paint and pick it up with the foam stamp. So I can kind of stamp on the gel plate. And this is a really thin layer, so this will probably dry quite quickly. Let's do another color with another stamp. And you know, this is supposed to, you can go totally crazy doing this, because you will probably only use little parts of this print. So you only pick the parts that fit your art journal page, or that speak to you. And sometimes if you have a lot of crazy layers built up, you actually, when you tear it in little pieces, they're really beautiful to use as collage paper. So I'm going to leave this to dry a little bit. That should not take too long. Let's see if I can speed it up a little bit. And meanwhile, I can look at the comments to see if there are any. I see a comment about the tissue paper. They are usually big sheets. They are like 50 by 75 centimeters, which is quite big, and I just cut them in smaller pieces. But you don't have to buy like 480 sheets. I think it's 20 or 25 sheets when you buy them at CC Hobby in the Netherlands. And I don't know, Michael's has silk or tissue paper too. I don't know how big the packaging is, but it's probably not as big as when you buy them like wholesale or anything. So I'm just going to go with whatever I have here, and if it's not completely dry, then so be it. I'm going to pick up this paint that's still on the plate, and as you can see, I'm using a really thin layer of white paint. It's like almost translucent, so it might actually be also almost translucent when I use it in my art journal. This is the transparent mixing white. So that's a really nice white paint if you only want to use it to pick up paint from your gel plate. So here are the leftovers. Not even all of them, but quite a lot of the leftovers on my plate, which is also really nice. And besides using a layer of paint to pick up any paint from your plate, you can also use a matte medium, like a Liquitex matte medium or a DecoArt matte medium. And there are other brands that you can use, of course. The only thing you have to look for is that it's like fluid or semi-fluid, like it should run a little bit like this, or even better like the Liquitex one, which is like really fluid, because you want a really thin layer. And if the matte medium is very fluid, then it's easier to spread an even layer on the plate than when you have like a thicker, like a more heavy body matte medium. So I'm just going to see what else I can pick up from my plate. And I might actually end up with a really nice print, and if not, then at least I've cleaned my plate. I will fix that later. So let's just see what I can get off here. And it is really warm in here. I hope you had a really beautiful day too. I mean, it was about time, right, that the weather got a little bit better. Still not everything, but yeah, might be a nice texture. I will definitely keep it. I might just use this little bit here, or maybe just this little bit, but still it might end up somewhere at some point. Can you use it again for the next print? I suppose you mean this sheet, and I definitely can, only not at this very moment because it's wet and it needs to be dry, because if I put wet tissue paper on wet paint, then it will certainly rip. But I could actually real quick dry it and then just do the next print on here, because that's really a good idea, Inge. Actually, you will get this texture will show in the next print, and that can add just that little extra interest. So let's just do that. I'm going to do one more with the stencil, I think, and then I will get my art journal and show you what these prints look like when you glue them into your art journal. I have a very limited color palette tonight, but let me see. I think that's okay, but let's do a darker blue. Really nice Prussian blue, one of my favorites. And it makes a really nice purple together with the I think it's the rose, permanent rose, yes. Okay. So stencil, and let's also use this fun little textured brayer, which I created for my challenge last month. So if you want to see how I created this little textured brayer, then you can find it on my Instagram. On my Instagram feed, together with all 31 other prints I did last month. So let me see if I have all the tiny little spots here. I think so. And there we go. That's one. This one looks really nice. And then the paint that's underneath the stencil will make the second print. Yeah, this is always my favorite. I have a lot of cleanup paper that has like 10 or 20 layers like this, because I only use it to get rid of that first layer. So because I'm aiming for that leftover paint that's underneath the stencil. I really like the grungy, distressed look you get. Okay, I'm going to put my gel plate aside. And no, I'm not going to clean it. I'm going to leave it like this, because next time I print, this will pick up in my next prints, and give my prints a bit of a distressed look right from the start. When you start with a gel, with a clean gel plate, and the first couple of prints are always really, really clean, and I really like it when they have a little bit of this distressed look. So I will just leave it like this for my next session. And now I will get my art journal, one of my art journals, and find, let me find a page where I think, this might be nice, because you can then also still see the music notes. Yeah, let's do this one first. And then again, I need my matte medium. And for this gluing collage paper into my art journal, I also prefer the Liquitex matte medium for the same reason that it's so thin and you can really spread the gel medium so you get a nice and even layer of gel medium, and you can put your paper down really nice and flat. So how about trying this one? So I want to get most of the tissue paper that's around the area that I'm going to use. I want to take it off because I don't want that in my art journal, because it's always a little bit kind of taking away from the color. So I want to get rid of this. And tissue paper is, I don't know if it's the same with other paper. With tissue paper, it's like it has a direction in which you can tear it, and the other direction is really hard to tear it. And you don't want to use scissors, because then you get these like really sharp edge that you are more likely to see on your background than when you tear it. So what you do is you use a wet brush and you just kind of draw the outline of the area that you want to use with some water. And then it the tissue paper tears very easily, and you can just take away the excess, as you can see. And you get this like really soft outline here that will not show up as much as when you use scissors. Okay, let me, that's better. So I'm just going to leave this part on when I'm gluing it into my art journal, because then I can just cut it off when it's glued in there, and I don't have to be very precise with where I'm going to put it. So now I'm just going to add some matte medium on my background. A nice and thin, even layer. You really don't need a thick layer. A thin layer is even better, because your paper will wrinkle less. But make sure that there's some matte medium everywhere. Then you put the tissue paper down. And then the trick is that you also add the matte medium on top. So not only underneath, but also on top of the paper. And when the tissue paper gets really wet from the matte medium, you can see it turns almost completely translucent. It's of course not like when you use a transparency or something like that, because it is still paper, but it's almost translucent. And especially if you do more layers on top of each other, you will hardly see that it is tissue paper. It almost looks as if you printed this straight into your art journal. So now this has to dry, and then I can remove this part of the tissue paper, and then I can use that for something else. But you can see already that you can hardly see the line. You see it a little bit, but it's not like it's more like when you know it, you see it. If you don't know it, you don't see it. But there are even tricks to get rid of those lines too, and I can show you that too. So I'm just going to dry this real quick. And if there are a little bit, if you have a little bit of wrinkles in your tissue paper, there will always be less wrinkles in tissue paper than there are in thicker paper. So that's a benefit too. But if there are any wrinkles when you've just put it down, most of them will totally smooth out when you use your heat tool to dry the tissue paper. It's kind of like as if the tissue paper shrinks a little bit and all the wrinkles get out. So you can see how smooth it is. There's not one wrinkle in there. That is pretty cool, right? So I'm just going to tear this off. There you go. Now you can see a tiny little bit here, these edges, and what I like to do is use my water soluble products, like for instance my Lura Groove Triple, but you can also use Woody's or Neo Color 2 or even watercolor pencils. And you just go over this area here, and I'm going to use the lighter pink here. And if you have a set of like watercolor pencils with a lot of different colors, then you will almost always find a color that is very close. And then you can use water to spread the color. And then when it's dry, you will see even less of that edge. You could even, what you could even do is now use your gel plate and add a layer of matte medium on top using your gel plate, so you don't have to like spread the gel medium with your brush, which seals everything that's underneath. So if you use water soluble products and you want to work on top with other wet products, then you can seal the water soluble products by adding that layer of matte medium. And if you would do it with a brush, you would totally move the water soluble product on your page. But if you do it with the gel plate, then the gel medium is not moving and you're just adding that layer and you're just sealing everything. So let me take another page and show you how you can work with like little bits of tissue paper. Let me find a good one. Like we could, yeah, let's just use this one, just to show you that you can like build up layers of tissue paper. So let's see. Let's take a piece from maybe a little bit of this. So of course you can totally tear it like this without making it wet if you don't really care about how big it is and how clear the edges are. And you can do that without using a wet brush. But if you want to have this like specific piece, then it's always better to use a wet brush. Or better, it's easier to get a nice specific area if you use a wet brush. So again, I'm going to add a little bit of gel medium, and I'm going to add a little bit of gel medium on top. And here you can see, this is what I really like about the tissue paper. It would be really hard to create a little textured area like this on your page directly, because usually when you have stamps or stencils or whatever, you get like the entire image. It's hard to have like get a little piece of distressed texture, and if you use tissue paper, then you can apply even the tiniest little piece of texture wherever you want it. For instance, if I would want like only this tiny part of this stencil, that would be really hard to do straight into my journal. But with the tissue paper, I totally can. And do you see how nice the color comes out when I put the gel medium on top? And I don't know if you can see it. I will do another layer on top of that because that might show even better. But can you see that even the texture of my first part of tissue paper, you can see it here in the open area of my second little piece of tissue paper? So that's what I meant with building up the layers. So I'm now going to use a little bit of this. And I'm just randomly adding these layers now to my art journal page. And it's not like I'm actually creating something specific here. It's just that I'm showing you how you can use the gel medium. But at some point, this will actually become something. Because this is all still background. And I can keep adding for a long time before I actually finish my page. So here you have the tissue paper with the numbers, and even though this was pretty much a solid color, you can still see that there is something underneath. You can still see that there is some color. Now if I put this on top, you will definitely see that the yellow will shine through this area here. Now here I'm doing it without the water, and you can see that I have a really hard time getting a really nice edge here. So it all depends on the look and the feel that you're aiming for, of course. Maybe you like the distressed edges, then you can just do it like this. But if you want a little bit more control, then you can still definitely use the wet brush. Now, let me see if there are any questions. So Victoria says, did you make the book from scratch or used an old book for your art journal? Well, I used an old book for the cover, but I took the inside out and then the rest is all just gel printed papers, painted papers, book paper, all kinds of maps and stuff, found papers, very random. So let me show you. I hope the light is good enough for you to see. But you can really see the yellow of my first tissue layer shining through my second tissue layer. And if for any reason you think this layer of or this yellow isn't bright enough anymore and you want it to be brighter, then nobody says that it has to stop here, right? Nobody says that this has to be the finished, the last step of doing something. You can totally go in there with a watercolor pencil and add color if your colors are not bright enough or not outspoken enough for to your liking. So colored pencils, watercolor pencil, crayons, ink, watercolor ink, it will all work perfectly. So you can just add that to your tissue paper prints. And I also want to show you a little piece of this, my not so favorite print, but the way it looks on the background is very different than when it is on white paper. So it's almost time, but I really want to do this real quick. I don't think Facebook will throw me out if I stay a little bit longer than the 1 hour. I don't know how that works really. Normally we do 1 hour sessions, but maybe that's just because we decided to do it 1 hour. Again, some gel medium. And there we go. Now look at that. It gives a really, really different effect than if you would have just pasted, glued this same texture in there on a white sheet of paper, right? Because now it becomes part of the background. It looks as if it was deliberately stamped in there or stenciled in there, because you still can see some of the background shining through. Okay. I think you can do a live as long as you wish. That's good to know. But I think I have to kind of stop now. I'm real quick going to switch the camera. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this quick demo on how to print on tissue paper and how you can use it in your art journal. I hope you learned something new and that you are going to experiment and try a little bit with this. So next Monday I will be live on the Michael Store website with a demo about using yarn, thread and rope on the gel plate, and it's a free Zoom class. You don't have to pay, but you have to register, and you can find the link to register on the Jelly Arts blog in the events calendar. And I would love to see you there again. And otherwise, I hope to see you again for my next Facebook Live. Thank you for being here tonight. See you again. Bye. Bye-bye.